Providing insights to help you grow your business, improve yourself, and add value to those around you. You're listening to the Success is a Choice podcast, where you get a peek into the lives of industry leaders as they share their stories with you.
Hey, welcome everybody to the Success is a Choice podcasting network. I'm your host, Jamy Bechler. And today we have a real treat for you today. Jennifer Sey is on the show. Jennifer was the president of Levi's brand. She was chief marketing officer of the Levi's brand. She is a former elite gymnast. In fact, she was the 1986 U.S. national champion, all-around champion. She's also written a couple of books we'll get to. One is Chalked Up. One is Levi's Unbuttoned. She's also a producer on a Netflix show that you probably have seen, or a Netflix series you probably saw, a documentary called Athlete A. So Jen, welcome to the Success is a Choice show.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
We're very excited to have you. I know my wife is extremely excited to have you because just the other day she walked past my office and thought I must have had left the house, my home office, without her knowing, because she could hear it was YouTube, and she would swear that there's no way Jamy would be watching gymnastics. She could hear Mary Lou Retton's voice, and she could hear gymnastics on in my home office, and she wondered what in the world's going on. And I told her, hey, I'm having this great gymnast on. And she was so excited because I've made fun of her for years about the only reason she tunes into Olympics is to watch gymnastics.
That is true for a lot of people. Women's gymnastics is the most watched sport in the Summer Olympics and has been for many, many years.
Yeah, yeah, people watch that. I'm sometimes at a loss for that, but there's great stories from it. There's so many different contests too. It's not just one thing with gymnastics, but you started at an early age, which is the norm for gymnastics. Tell us kind of your story in becoming an elite gymnast and becoming this national champion on the same level as a Mary Lou Retton, a Simone Biles.
Sure. I would not put myself in the category of Simone, the greatest gymnast that's ever lived, but I hear you.
You didn't, but we will.
Okay. I started when I was about 5 or 6. It was in the mid 70s. There weren't a lot of options for girls who were athletic and energetic. Now there's a soccer league, there's this, there's that, for everything the boys can participate in, the girls can. But it was just a few years after Title IX, which, made it so that the law required that women and girls have equal opportunities in education, and sports was part of that. That meant equal opportunity for college scholarships and sports, et cetera. So it was all just starting to ramp up in the 70s, but there weren't a lot of choices yet. And I was this rambunctious, energetic kid. And then Nadia happened in the 1976 Olympics. And for those that don't remember, Nadia Comaneci, she's the first person that got a perfect 10. The scoreboard couldn't even handle it. They had to flash a 1.0 because there was no, the scoreboard didn't have enough digits to do a 10. The judges were completely flummoxed with the perfection of her performance. But I think importantly, she was 14 and she looked and was a girl. And so girls across this country related to that. And we just rushed to gyms across the country, and gyms started popping up everywhere. And I was one of those little girls, and I went to one class and I wanted more. And by the time I was about 7, I made the team, and I was consistently told, I was too fearful, I wasn't strong enough, I wasn't fast enough, but I just loved it. And I wanted to keep going. And I learned how to lean into the things that I was really good at. I was really graceful and flexible, and those are also important attributes in the sport. And by the time I was 10, I made my first national team. That's how young this sport is, which is sort of crazy and I think problematic in a sense. But it used to be, and this is changing, and Simone has been part of that, it was considered a little girl's sport and you had this narrow window of opportunity to succeed. And so you just kept going and going. You might have an injury, but you kept going because you couldn't afford to miss a season. You had so few seasons in you. And that's problematic for obvious reasons. If you have an injury, you don't let it heal, you keep going. That was the sort of coaching philosophy. But I loved it until I did not anymore because it's pretty brutal. So I was on the national team from the time I was about 10 until I was 18 or 19. So a really long time. And I kept begging my parents to send me to, quote, better and better gyms because I wanted to break into a higher ranking. I loved the sport and I might have been the top 12 in juniors, but I wanted to get to top 6, et cetera. And then in 1985, I made the world championship team, which is the top 6. And I had a great competition until the last event where I broke my femur in Montreal on the world stage. And of course, this is my first debut. I mean, I'd been to international competitions, but not the worlds. And everyone thought I was done. I thought I was done. I thought for sure there was no coming back from a broken femur. And lo and behold, I came back 9 months later and I won the 1986 USA Championships. And that's when it got really bad, ironically. I was competing on a broken ankle in that competition. I was 17, so I was already considered old for the sport, but the Olympics was 2 years away. And I wanted to walk away. I was really sort of unraveling. I had an eating disorder, I had serious injuries, but I kept going and ended up retiring just a few months before the Olympic trials in 1988 because I just completely unraveled. I was unable to do it anymore. My body and my mind were too broken. So the irony is, I had all this great success, but I walked away feeling like a failure. And the sport is really abusive in terms of the coaching culture. And I struggled, for a very long time with that as an adult. The repercussions of that physically and emotionally are serious and grave.
Well, we'll get to your book, Chalked Up, your Netflix documentary, Athlete A, in just a moment, talking about those things. But going back to when you were competing, you had mentioned you had a lot of successes. What is kind of your definition of success? Obviously you won a lot. You were successful in terms of on the scoreboard or getting ribbons or medals.
Yeah.
Was that how you were measuring success as a teenager through other people? Or and I'm sure your idea of success now is different than your idea of success as a teenager.
Yeah. I mean, I think as a kid, because I was told from such a young age that I didn't really have what it would take. I didn't have these fanciful dreams of making the Olympics. Like, I didn't think that was really a possibility. And in fact, when I qualified for Worlds, I placed second in that competition. I had 2 broken fingers and 2 black eyes because I'd suffered an injury just days before. I was astonished, that I placed that high. And I think the whole community was as well. But I was incredibly consistent. I got to this place in my gymnastics career that I just didn't fall. And that in and of itself is a huge advantage. And I just showed up and I hit my routines. And, I think from the time I broke my femur to the time I walked away, I didn't miss anything in competition. And that was a huge advantage. You see the kids on TV now and they don't show you the ones that fall, but we all fell all the time. It's not just fell off and got the 5.5 tenths of a point deduction, but fell and had terrible injuries. And so that's sort of concealed from the audience how dangerous it is. But I think for myself, I just exceeded my own expectations all the time. So I was never really comparing myself to others. I was always sort of beating what I thought I was capable of. And to your point, my definition has changed as an adult because, not to kind of head your question off at the past, but I think my most significant contributions to the sport at this point are not my performance in the sport, but exposing the abuses in the sport. And I think that's what I'm known for and remembered for, by some not so positively. But, that is a contribution I never would have dreamed of, but that's now what I would consider success. Because when I wrote my book in 2008 called Chalked Up, I sort of opened the door to that conversation about the abusive training methods. The world wasn't ready for it. I was dragged across the internet and called all sorts of horrible names. But 10 years later, when Larry Nassar, the coach of USA Gymnastics, who sexually assaulted over 500 athletes, when he went to prison for life, I received so many messages that said, I read your book and that gave me the courage to come forward. You gave me the courage. And then when I made the film Athlete A in 2020, and I concepted the film and, wrote the story and produced it, it really created dramatic change in the sport. Athletes around the world came together and they said, no more. We have been abused in this sport and we do not want it to happen to any other girls. And there have been investigations in many countries around the world. And I think the most heartening message I get is from young athletes, elite athletes from various countries saying, I didn't even realize it was abusive until you put the pieces together for me. I just thought that was normal. And I thought that my suffering was a result of my own weakness. But you put the pieces of the puzzle together for me. And I realized that is an unacceptable way to train a child. And that to me is success, that I was able to help these young people and give them the courage to come forward and try to create something new for a new generation of athletes.
Well, we have a lot of coaches, educators, leaders, people that work with young people. So I think that that's important to kind of perk up our ears and listen to this and digest this a little bit. I would love to be able to say that obviously we shouldn't be abusing kids. I would love to be able to say that that's obvious.
It's not.
Obviously it wasn't. It's not obvious. But for coaches and leaders out there, what would be a takeaway for you? Not necessarily from the sexual abuse, the Larry Nassar thing. And I would like to say that that's an exception, and it's an extreme.
Yeah.
It happens far too frequently, but on a
Yeah.
lesser scale, the mental abuse, the calling the names, or just what a lot of coaches will talk about, tough love.
Right.
How can coaches be a little bit better, or is there a balance that you can see between being tough love or the quote unquote tough love, but also being, let's sit in a circle saying kumbaya?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I don't think it's a fuzzy line. I think it's a bright line between mental and emotional abuse and tough coaching, which is necessary, and high standards for your athletes and pushing them beyond maybe what they think is possible. And, that's been one of the criticisms, or was in the early days when I spoke out, that, this is just tough coaching. And I will say, what I tried to do with Athlete A is connect the physical and emotional abuse to the sexual abuse, because I think they are connected. And I think when you beat an athlete down, a child, in the ways that happen in gymnastics, emotionally and physically, they are sort of more prone to not speaking up in their own defense, and they are more likely to be abused. And I think in a sport that does this, like gymnastics, it was almost the inevitable outcome that somebody like Larry Nassar would be able to get away with this for so long. Because the definition of healthy coaching, child development, is just out the window, and the girls are expected, and the boys, to just be silent in the face of abuse. And it's really disorienting, because you think that you are suffering, you're being bullied and fat shamed and forced to train on very serious injuries, and you're told you're lazy and fat and stupid. So if a doctor or coach then sexually abuses you, you think this terrible thing is happening, but you're told, no, this is just because we have a special relationship. That's what they would. So they are really connected. But, I would say to a coach, and I have said this for many years, the reason we as adults put our children into sports, like, think about why we do that, right? We do it because we think that it has developmental benefits for a child, developing self-esteem, healthy minds and bodies, developing the sense that they can kind of fail but can get up and keep trying. Those are all great things. That is your obligation as a coach, especially of a child, that child's development, that child's healthy, emotional, physical, mental development, that is your goal. You want to help make them into resilient adults. You don't want to beat them down so they are so crushed by the sport that they can't do anything as adults. Sports are a tool. Most kids will never perform at the elite level. They will never make a professional sports team or even get a college scholarship. You want to build them into resilient adults, and abusing them is not the way to do that. So when I say it's a bright line, I mean bullying, forcing to train on broken bones, humiliating for weight. I mean, my weight was announced on the loudspeaker at my gym twice a day if I gained a quarter pound. Is there any question that that is a bullying, abusive tactic? I don't think so. When a 14-year-old's weight is announced and, the coach comes on and says, Jen is fat and we don't coach fat gymnasts. Is that's not a fuzzy line. How does that build resilience? That's shaming. When a child has food taken away from them publicly, at a meal the night before a competition, when a child has a broken bone and they're told they're a lazy piece of garbage if they don't want to keep training, how is that not abuse? So, to me, it's not a bright line. Now, having high standards and high expectations and believing in that kid more than they even believe in themselves, pushing them beyond maybe what they think is possible, that's healthy coaching that builds resilience. And that's the obligation of a coach. And I think too often they forget that and they get so caught up in winning that they ignore the child's psyche and their development.
Well, we need to remember, it's our responsibility to try to inspire people. We want to figure out how to inspire Jen to be her best, not manipulate her or coerce her to do more so that I can look good as a leader or a coach. But I talk with coaches all the time, educators all the time. And certainly I don't mean this in a bad way, but the buzzword for the last couple of years has been mental health. It's a buzz phrase. It's something that's on everyone's mind, which is a great thing. But coaches are struggling with how to handle this. And I want to talk to you about sticking with gymnastics. Never thought I would do this long on gymnastics, but sticking with the gymnastics theme, Simone Biles, who we mentioned before, who I put you in the same breath as her, only because you've won. You both were national champions, but Simone Biles there was a lot of criticism of her in the Olympics, depending on what your perspective is. And even some people may see both sides of it, but I'm curious. I know kind of where you stand from hearing you, but from a coach perspective, from a leader perspective, how can we deal with somebody that's maybe work with somebody that's going through mental issues that it could also affect the team? Because I think that's a difficult thing. At least from talking with coaches, how do we handle this?
Yeah. I mean, I think in the case of Simone, and I've made my views clear on this, I'm very proud of what she did. And I think what people forget about gymnastics that I think is somewhat unique is how dangerous it is. And so on a slow day, you're not just going to have a slower score, a slower time. You could break your neck, literally. And I can't even tell you how many people who have broken their necks or their backs. I know a few that have been paralyzed. I know 2 that have died doing the sport. So I think that's important to keep in mind. And, Simone's teammates weren't angry with her. They knew. So let's keep that in mind also. And they still won. They knew where she was. And what happens in the sport is you can really lose a sense of it when you're as my mind and body unraveled. And at the end of my time in sport, I couldn't do things that I'd been able to do since I was 9 years old. Like my mind I lost it. She called it the twisties. It's a well-known thing in gymnastics. You lose the ability. You don't know up from down. And she knew that she would put herself in extreme physical danger if she were to continue. Now, I think what would have been more ideal is that, and I said this when she won the first Olympics, I was like, she should walk away now, walk away on top. Why not walk away a winner? There shouldn't be pressure to continue. So it's unfortunate she had to do it there, but I think the strength of character to do it there and say, you know what, I'm going to protect myself in this is considerable. And I think it's an interesting bookend to the Carrie Strug story, who in 1996 competed on a very injured ankle It came out okay, but her score was not needed. They told her it was not, and she could have landed on her head or her neck, or instead she landed on one foot and kept going. And the team did win, but they won with, they didn't need her score. And so to me, when I watched that unfold in 1986, it made me sad because everybody said, oh, it's so heroic, but I felt like the adults in charge were ignoring the real possibility of severe injury, and that she should have been given the space to say, gosh, I really want this team to win, but I can't go. I
Now,
cannot go.
now I have propped that example up many times and used that example many times as mental toughness in an athlete. This is amazing. You know, she didn't want to let down her team, didn't want to let down her teammates, but the perspective that you bring of that wasn't necessary, and the coach, shame on the coach. I think is a very good perspective that you bring to that discussion about Carrie Strug.
Yeah, I mean, and she is mentally tough. You know, so was I. I competed on a broken ankle for 2 years. I wish I hadn't. That ankle is destroyed now. You know, I'm in my 50s and have needed an ankle replacement since I'm 40 years old. I wish somebody had said to me, you need to rest and let this heal. But that was not the way. And that's the adult's responsibility, you know? And they've learned this in professional sports, I think, because to some extent, again, it's the money that's on the line. If you've invested $40 million in a basketball player as a team, you want to make sure that he can keep going as long as possible, and you get you get the ROI on that. And so they're a lot better now, I think, about letting that athlete rest, deploying all the latest methods to help that athlete heal. In amateur sports, I still think they're not good at that because the money is not there and they feel like there's someone else right behind you. So you keep going. If you can't make it, you're weak, and I'm going to welcome in these others that are just waiting, that want your spot on the team. And it's a disservice to the athlete and the human. To me, winning's not worth destroying a child's body and mind. It's just not.
Well, we mentioned you were the 1986 U.S. national champion, all-around champion, a long, prestigious list of young athletes that have accomplished that. But we've also mentioned the year previous, 9 months previous, you broke your femur. That's not just a little stress fracture. That was an ugly fall. Do you still cringe when you watch that video? Do you?
Oh, I've never watched it.
You've never watched that?
No.
That's probably smart.
I can't watch it. It was catastrophic. I mean, it was horrible.
And to come back from that, that's an amazing, if you're watching this and you have a stomach for those kinds of things. Some of us I don't like watching injuries. But if you are one of those people and you watch that, it is all the more amazing that you could come back 9 months later and win the national championship.
I agree. It's an amazing feat. And there's a part of me that's, very proud of myself, but I wish I'd been given the space to heal, because part of the reason I broke the ankle on the opposing side is I was unbalanced, and my femur wasn't healed. My cast came off early. I trained the whole time with a cast on. And then in taking it off early, I favored the other leg and broke the ankle on the opposing leg. And that's the ankle that causes me trouble now. What if I'd let myself heal and waited till 87 to come back? I think I might have had a career that lasted a little bit longer, and maybe I would have been able to get to those 88 games, and maybe I wouldn't be limping around now at 53 years of age. So it certainly took remarkable discipline. I will not argue with you there. I think there was another way, though, and it would have prevented damage to my body that I experience the repercussions of now, which I didn't understand as a young person. And I had an irresponsible doctor who took the cast off and pushed me back out there and shot me up with cortisone every 6 weeks so I could keep going. And I thought, well, this hurts now, but when I walk out of the gym, it'll be fine. That's not how the human body works. If you are training on a serious injury, that will cause problems in all likelihood for the rest of your life.
Well, you were a national champion, elite gymnast, most people, they could say, well, that's a good enough life right there. By the time you were 17 or 18, you had lived, what a lot of people would think is success, but you went on to become the chief marketing officer of Levi's brand, the president of Levi's brand. That's not too shabby. That's a pretty good thing on the resume. I know we had a foreign exchange student from Japan back in the late 80s, and he must have bought 60 to 70 pairs of Levi's and sent them back to Japan because
the Japanese love Levi's,
and he could get them cheaper. And he made a lot of money off selling them probably in Japan.
Yeah.
But yeah, Levi's, a brand that everybody knows, everybody loves, everybody has worn, but you became a high up executive in Levi's. What are some lessons that you learned, or if someone's here sitting here thinking, man, I want to be an executive. I want to be somebody that's, has this C-suite, or this nice office with a window. What are some lessons that you learned or advice that you would have for those people?
Well, I think, I applied that work ethic and that discipline to my work life. And that was a really useful thing. If I faced obstacles or barriers, I found a way to either overcome them or go around them, or, I didn't take a barrier or an obstacle as the end game. I was creative in how I overcame, and disciplined in how I overcame those barriers. And so that's the first thing. And that's not to say that some people's barriers aren't bigger than others. I had a great head start. I went to Stanford University. But I had some horrible bosses and anti-mentors, you could say. And I learned to move around that. And I certainly came up at a time when sexism was rampant in corporate America. And I think it's great that it's getting better. It's not perfect. The glass ceiling still exists, but I never considered quitting because of it. I just pushed onward, and I felt like if I'm in charge, I'm going to do it differently. I think one thing I learned, and I probably learned this a little late, I might have been in my 40s by the time I learned this, is you can accept some feedback and reject some feedback. You can decide as an adult human that you do not agree with the feedback. And, it took me a really long time to do that, and it was like years of conflicting feedback. You're not this, you're to this. And it was constantly conflicting. And finally I said to myself, that's ridiculous. I'm going to keep going. I know I am good at this. I was told 2 times by 2 different brand presidents, you will never be a chief marketing officer here or anywhere else. You are operationally, which means sort of like you're a great number 2. You're operationally sound, but you're limited in your creativity. You get stuff done, but you have no vision. And I was like, that's when I, in my mind, went, you're wrong. You're wrong. You get to do that. I was a 40-year-old woman. I get to reject that feedback and keep going. And I was the most successful chief marketing officer the company ever had. I helped take the company from the brink of bankruptcy to a successful IPO. I knew what I had in me, and they were wrong. So that's the first thing. I also was a committed coach. For an executive, you are a coach about 50% of the time. I mean, maybe that's not the right word, but you're a mentor and a leader and a coach. And I wanted to help people. One, I knew I couldn't do it alone. My team was 1,000 people. I needed to create the space for everybody to do great work, make good decisions. If I was the sort of arbiter of everything that happened, I would just be a roadblock and stop work from happening. And so I wanted to develop people. I spent time developing people, and I wanted to give them the space to do great work. I did not have all the answers. And I said that. I said, great ideas can come from anywhere. Bring them to me. I want to hear them. It doesn't mean we're going to do it all. We'll decide together. And so I took a little bit of, I guess, what I wished had been how I had been coached, and I deployed that with my team. And I think that was a big part of my success as a leader.
Okay, so life is too short to make all mistakes ourselves. So we'd like to learn from you. Are there some mistakes or a mistake that you made coming up, or even when you were chief marketing officer or president, even a mistake you made that maybe we can listen to your story and not make those same mistakes?
It's a good question. I think for a long time, and this is, I think, more common in women, and it was certainly an affliction I faced coming out of the sport. I blamed myself for every problem. I was all too willing to accept blame and responsibility for things that weren't even my fault. To say, I did it, I'll fix it. Um, and the opposite isn't good either, right? To say nothing's like, I believe in owning your mistakes and saying, I'm going to correct this. I will work with the team. But I took responsibility for everything. I was like, look at me, I messed this up. I mean, that's just stupid. So don't do that. And I also suffered, I would say, and again, I think this is more common in women, but not exclusively, from imposter syndrome. I just didn't have any confidence. And I felt like somebody was going to find out at any moment that I was a fraud, and they were going to usher me out of the building. And that was true when I got to Stanford. That was true in every job I ever held. I felt like at every level in my corporate life, like I wanted to get into that room where the decisions were made, but I didn't feel I deserved it. And then I'd get in there and I'd be like, I know how to do this better than a lot of these people. Like, why did I ever think that? And so it sounds really dumb, but you've got to have the confidence in your own mental abilities and your own capability. And I think I believed the conflicting negative feedback for far too long, for 20 years, even with all evidence to the contrary, that I was leading a team successfully. I was putting successful work into the market. I was willing to believe the worst things people said about me. And I don't know how to tell people not to do that, but don't do it. It's just, it's detrimental. It holds you back. And it took me a really long time, to learn how not to do that. And when I finally came to the understanding, like one of the things I used to think, I have this ability, which I now think is my great strength, to sort of simplify complexity, right? And there is a willingness and desire, I think, in corporate America, I'm sure it exists elsewhere, to overcomplicate everything, because that lets you stay in your job, right? If I make this really complicated and pretend like I'm the only one that understands how to do it, then no one else can have my job. So I was told all the time, I would say, can't we just do it this way? And people would say, you just don't understand the problem. As it turned out, I did. And I was able to synthesize a lot of complexity into a simple path forward. And that was my strength as a leader. I wish I'd realized that sooner. I think I was in my early 40s before I realized that was the great strength that I should lean into as a leader. And so once I did, when people would complicate things, I would say, wait, that's not, here's the issue, here's where we want to get, here's the solution, or let's come up with the solution and the path forward. So I think try to learn and understand what your strength is. That's not everyone's. What is your strength as a leader that you can bring uniquely to the table, and lean into that. Lean into your strengths. You don't have to be great at everything. If you can capitalize on your strengths, then you can lead an organization, or at least be successful in the job that you have and that you want to have. There's this idea that, you always get feedback on the things that maybe you're weak on. That you don't have to be great at everything. You can't possibly. I led a team of, like I said, 1,000 people. There's a lot of jobs in that organization I never held. I didn't know how to do, but I could simplify the challenge, ask good questions, and help them get to the solutions. That was my strength as a leader. I don't know if that answered your question. I kind of went on a tangent.
No, that was good stuff. And I think leaders and coaches would benefit if they could remember that for the people that they work with. Remember that for your athletes, your students, your employees, is that don't focus always on that negative. Focus on what they can do, what their strength is, and put them in positions to succeed.
Yeah. I mean, it's possible that a negative, you've got to get to the baseline, right? Like if I couldn't read a P&L and couldn't do basic math, like I'm probably not going to be the brand president, but I do not have to have the financial capability of a CFO, right? I didn't have to. You summarized it well, because I think if I had coaches from the beginning who were willing to kind of lean into my strengths as a very graceful, consistent performer, flexible, like all of these qualities that could create a winner. Someone like Nastya Lukin, who won the 2008 Olympics, those were her strengths. And those were in direct sort of contrast to the number 2, Shawn Johnson, but Shawn was predicted to be the winner as this strong sort of Mary Lou Retton type. There's more than one way to win. And so as a coach, lean into that athlete's strengths and build on those rather than constantly tearing them down for the weakness.
And we certainly don't want to enable people around us and overlook weaknesses if they can improve on them. But sometimes we throw out the baby with the bathwater. Sometimes we're like, man, Jen, you just can't do X, Y, or Z. So you're no good to us. And it's like, what, but I can do this, this, and this. And
right.
That's a benefit to us. And we don't do that, whether it's a coach or whoever. And we also don't, going back to something you said earlier about, you didn't say keep it simple, stupid. You didn't say the KISS method, but you said turning a complexity into something simple. How many teachers, how many coaches, even how many executives out there are making things so complex that it turns people off? They don't want to do their job anymore, or they burn out, or the pressures are too high.
Yeah. And I think that's a real weakness as a leader. And I think it's self-preservation. It's like protecting your kind of role. That's why there's all this weird language that's inscrutable that others can't understand. It's like, there's a name for it. You might know it. I don't remember what it is, but this like idea that I am the gatekeeper, and if you don't understand this language and you don't understand how complex this is, it sort of protects you in your role if people buy it. Now, I look at it and I go, if you can't simplify this for an organization of 100 or 1,000 people, then you're not going to be successful as a leader, which doesn't mean some of these challenges aren't hard, but you've got to be able to break it down into steps that, can move an organization forward. You need to set a clear vision that is inspiring to people that they can move towards. And that isn't to say you allow, weak performance or poor performance, I think the line, to answer your question from before, look, you have to have high standards. That's not what I'm questioning here. I'm not a believer in everybody gets a medal. I think part of what youth sports is about is learning to lose and dust yourself off and get back up again. That's okay. I learned to lose at 6 or 7 years old. I was fine with it. I kept trying. And in the corporate world, it's not about accepting poor performance. It's about holding people to a high standard that they're. And sometimes things are a bad fit. Sometimes a person's skill set is not right for the job, and you have to have that conversation. I have had to have that conversation hundreds of times, and in most instances, that person then realized it wasn't a good fit, and they went on to find a much better one where they could be successful. So, it is, there is a line, but not everyone can do every job. Not every kid can do every sport, and that's okay. You need to give them good, clear feedback so they can find the thing they will be great at. Everybody's great at something.
Well, I mentioned that you were the former chief marketing officer and the former president of Levi's brand. You took a stand. You were courageous. You voiced an opinion that was not maybe popular within Levi's, and that makes you former. It also makes you now an author. You wrote a book, Levi's Unbuttoned, but we have a lot of, obviously, coaches, educators, people that work with students, people that were in schools or not in schools during the lockdowns, during the pandemic, which is what got you in a little bit of hot water, but what also made you kind of question things, and talk to us a little bit about that. Not even, there's people listening to this that believe that schools shouldn't be open.
Yeah.
There's people listening to this believing that schools should never have closed.
Yeah.
One of your very first, comments or first things that you put out there was, why aren't we even having the conversation? Not necessarily should it be open or closed? Obviously you had opinions about that, but it was, why aren't we even talking about that stuff?
Right. That is, I firmly believe that the schools should not have been closed, certainly not as long as they were. And I think there's ample evidence from countries around the world, as well as states within this country, that is the truth, that kids were mercifully left relatively unscathed from this illness, COVID, and that the harms through keeping them at home for, in some cases, a year and a half, through disrupted schooling for up to 2.5 years, has been incredibly harmful. The learning loss, the isolation, the depression. So I stand firm in that, and I don't believe that should be a political perspective, protecting kids, but it has become one. But my greater message to your point is, why couldn't we have the conversation about it? What happened instead is that esteemed doctors, who were formerly considered the foremost experts in the world in terms of, virology, epidemiology, they were smeared and silenced and sidelined and blacklisted. Normie parents like me who just knew how to read data, the same happened, and it's ultimately why I lost my job. And I think this suppression of speech and debate in this country is alarming, and it prevents us from having necessary conversations in business and in life. And I think when you can't have those conversations, and what happens is those who think they have the monopoly on truth demonize the others and call them names when they don't have good arguments, and scare everybody else into silence. So there's this manufactured consensus. We stop pursuing the truth. And that is incredibly dangerous. And I really honestly believe if there had been a real conversation about this, kids in schools, the pros, the cons, rather than smearing those who were pushing for open schools, if there had been a real conversation, I think they would have opened sooner, and the harms to children would have been far, far less. And so that is really my message now. And to kind of relate it to something we were talking about earlier in the sort of larger theme of the show, I've redefined what success is for myself, because sure, I would have loved to have been the CEO. I was ousted from the company for being outspoken about the need to open schools and protection of children. I now define success differently, and I am committed to driving forward. I accidentally found myself in this fortunate or unfortunate position, and I am going to make the most of it, and I am going to continue to speak out about the suppression of speech and debate in this country, because I think it's really dangerous. And fully leveraging the platform that I've been given, that to me now is my definition of success. And I don't need to be the CEO of Levi's.
Well, it's a shame that we're not allowed to have conversations in whatever it is, whether it's school issues or you name it. We can all list all these things where we just shut people off, or we get shut down. We don't have this discussion. And I want to learn, why is it that Jennifer has this idea? Because I respect Jennifer a great deal, or I respect my coach a great deal, or I'm a coach, I respect my sophomore athlete, but they have this opinion that I differ on. Why, where are they coming from? What's their perspective? And I like to learn, and we don't get that nowadays, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, we definitely don't. I don't understand it. Honestly, I don't have a good answer as to why, but I am committed to changing it. We used to be able to debate the issues of the day in this country. We used to be able, you could be a member of a political party and not agree with the entire platform. For instance, I was a lifelong, I know it's not a political show, but I'm going to use this as an illustrative example. I was a lifelong Democrat. I would have called myself left of center. I always voted for the either far left candidate or the one that was even further left than the Democratic Party. I dared to question this aspect of the platform, and then I was smeared and demonized as like an alt-right QAnon lunatic that doesn't even make any sense. But it's like you sign up for the whole thing or you're all the bad things. And that is what discourages others from speaking up and asking common sense questions. And so I think it is the obligation of every citizen to ask those questions and defend the rights of others. People ask me all the time, what can I do? I can't afford to lose my job. I get it. You can defend the right of others to say the thing. If you're in a work environment and somebody asks a question that maybe others disagree with and everybody comes down on them, why not step forward and say, hey, let's hear her out? What's wrong with having a conversation? It's such a simple thing, but you can sort of, I don't agree with her, but I want to hear what she has to say, because maybe this will lead to a good conversation and we'll get to a better answer. I just think it's incumbent upon all of us to defend this notion of free speech. And I know the First Amendment doesn't protect me, and it's not. I worked for a private company. I'm tired of people pushing back with that, frankly, because what I am defending is a culture of free speech in this country that allows us to progress and move towards truth. I'm not debating the law. I understand the difference. But if we don't believe in that as a people, then we don't live in a democracy anymore. And that's how dire I think it is.
Well, we may not have the platform that you had, or we might not have the extreme situation of a choice that we make costs us millions and millions and millions of dollars with you staying in your job, let alone the $1 million severance package that you turned down. But we may not be in that situation, but each one of us every day, with our neighbor, a family member on Facebook, our athletes, our students, people we deal with, we have these interactions, and we either get shut down or they get shut down because we don't want to listen. And Stephen Covey wrote the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of his habits is seek first to understand, then to be understood. And a lot of times we listen just waiting for our turn to talk and waiting for, hey, I'm going to tell you I'm right. I'm going to tell you why I'm right, as opposed to listening to Jennifer and finding out what makes her tick. And it doesn't mean if I listen to you, I have to agree with everything you said. You're on this show. There's some people that would be like, oh, you gave this person, well, there'd be people that be like, you gave that Trumper, QAnon, crazy right-wing lady a platform. And it's like, well, first of all, I don't know all the things that I disagree with Jennifer on. I don't know those. I know some things I do agree with you on. I also realize that, all right, when people call you names, you're probably in their head. They don't have a logic anymore. They're just being mean and belittling people. The names you've been called, you even mentioned it. You were a lifelong Democrat. You still probably, well, we won't get into that, but you were being called names of things that definitely weren't true. And
and at first I found it really alarming, and I was really upset by it. And now I laugh at it, frankly, because it's so ridiculous and doesn't need to be grounded in any truth, the truth of your life, the arc of your life and your life's actions. I mean, it was the same when I wrote Chalked Up. I was called a grifter and a liar, out to make a buck, by smearing the names of these good coaches who I knew to be abusive, in some cases to be sexual abusers. I wasn't lying. I wasn't a grifter. It was horrible to go through that. And in case anyone has any sort of misconceptions about this, you don't make a lot of money writing a book when you're not famous. I mean, if you're not Michelle Obama. So I was not doing this. I was not writing this book and putting myself through that gauntlet that I went through to make money. I was already a vice president at Levi's. I was doing fine. I did not need to put myself through that. I did not learn in that experience that you have to dismiss the name calling, because it is the purview of those with no argument. I continued to try to convince people that I was not those things. As I went through my, children advocating for children during COVID, I did learn fairly early on that I had to just ignore the name calling and let it just wash off my back, because it was so false, so egregiously false, that it was just done. Now, it served a purpose, though, because other people saw it. And if they were even questioning some of the policies like I was, they were not about to stand up and defend me, because they did not want to be called those terrible, unemployable names. And that's what we have to resist, because that's what creates this environment of censorship, self-censorship, and this environment where there can be no debate and there can be no dissent. And what's unfortunate about that is, if there had been, I think we would have gotten to a different answer sooner. The unfortunate part is not that some executive lady lost her job. I mean, that's a bummer, and I don't like it. And, I'll probably always be a little angry about it. The really unfortunate part, though, is that we didn't have a conversation that allowed kids to get back to normal sooner. That's the part that I am really mad about.
Well, and anyone listening to this or watching this, there's tons of videos of Jennifer going on other shows, talking in depth about all the things that happened. We chose not to. This isn't a political show, and we didn't want to have her on just because she's the crazy lady that lost her job, the crazy executive. We don't want to have her on just because of that one thing, because she's known for much more and she's done so much more. But you can watch a lot of those things just by YouTubing her name and find out more of that backstory, because there's a lot more to it than we could get into. But at the end of the day, we have to remember that even no matter who we're dealing with, and a lot of us are dealing with youth.
Yeah.
We don't want to just also say to a 16-year-old and essentially tell them that they are not significant. I'm not going to listen to what you have to say because I know it all. I'm in an authority position. Just shut up and do what I tell you to do. Be compliant. Right. That's not a good leader. And that's not building a positive adult one day. That's teaching them to lead the same way. And we talked about this earlier, Jennifer. The abuses that you saw in coaching, a lot of those people, that's probably how they were taught. That's how they learned. And the cycle just keeps going. And so at some point, we've got to break this cycle, God, be the change you want to see in the world, to throw out the cliche.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right. And this was the coaching methodology. And in a sense, none of these coaches knew better, and it becomes totally normalized. Like, they don't even think there's anything wrong with it. But like, at a certain point, you're a sentient adult, and you have to think about what you're doing to a child. And at a certain point, I don't care what you went through as a child or how you were taught, it is your responsibility to be different, to think about it on your own with your own mind, and think about what you might be doing to a child and what your responsibility is as a coach. One of the things I tell coaches, after Athlete A came out, I did a bunch of, sessions with coaches. Ask the child, part of your responsibility as a coach is to help a child think for themselves, right? Child development. Ask them. I was never asked on any given day, how is your body feeling today? What do you feel capable of today? What do you think you can handle today? What do you want to work on? I couldn't have made a decision for myself. I mean, I wouldn't have known how. When I got to college, I was paralyzed. I didn't know how to do anything without being told what to do. That is not an adult. I had to teach myself that. You see what I'm saying? And, they used, in a sense, some of the tactics we're talking about, right? The name calling was a way to not listen to me. If I said, I didn't even say my ankle hurt. I just sat there probably crying because I had a broken ankle and was called terrible names. And then the doctor came in and shot me up with cortisone. Why not ask me? Why are you limping today? How does it feel? What can you do? How can I help you? I would have had to think about it. I would have had to learn to put it into words. I would have had to take responsibility for my own path forward with the help and support of a coach. None of that happened. Demands were made of me. And I just thought, if I follow instructions, everything will be fine. Are these the kinds of adults we want to raise? Follow instructions and everything will be fine? I don't think so.
When you mentioned that too, how can I help you? How can I help you? Great leaders, great coaches are going to find out ways to help their people, find ways to inspire them. But as a coach, I did the same thing. Hey, Jennifer's soft. Jennifer's not committed. Jennifer's, fill in the blank. Well, instead of helping her become those things, or maybe changing my expectations slightly, modifying those expectations of what those words even mean.
Or frame it in a positive. I believe you are capable of more. I believe you are. I know what you are capable of. I have seen it. Let's get there together. I know you got to dig deep. You got to push hard, but I know you can go out there and do X, Y, and Z. Like, inspire a kid. Don't cut them down. Don't we all respond better to that than being told we're a loser? Flip it on its head. For a lot of kids in sports, I recently had the opportunity to talk to a high school football coach. I'm making a documentary film about the impact of children from the prolonged school closures. And I had the chance to watch a few practices. And I said to him after, you're tough on those kids. And he said, I am, but I have high expectations. I know what they're capable of. And for many of these children, he worked in a high school in San Francisco in a low income district. Most of the kids Something like 80% of the kids are on free and reduced lunch, meaning, they're living at or below the poverty line. He said, in some instances, I'm the only adult in their lives that has these expectations of them. I take that responsibility very seriously. It's not that they didn't have parents that had high expectations, but many, as he told me, were from broken homes, or the parents just didn't have time. They were barely able to keep it together, working 3 jobs, to keep their kids clothed and with food. And he was like committed to their development and committed to them seeing themselves as someone that could be successful. And for a lot of these kids, he was the only one. He was tough, but they loved him. You could see it. And he never tore them down. He just held them to a higher standard.
Well, she's Jennifer Sey. You can follow her on Twitter at Jennifer Sey. Google, YouTube, check out some of her other videos, but she's got some books you want to check out. Also check out her Substack, jennifersey.substack.com. Check that out as well. Find out more of her thoughts. Jennifer, thank you so much for your time. We definitely appreciate that. We thank everybody out there for watching this on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Rumble, listening to it on the Success is a Choice podcast network. We appreciate it. And until next time, remember that success is a choice. What choice will you make today?